Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. This week we're gonna finally do the highly requested new 2024 DIRNDL pattern that you guys wanted. So I'm super happy to get into it. So let's start. As you guys know, I wanted to do a purple DIRNDL this year, and I am aiming for a very straight look. Like, not a lot of embellishments, just very plain, square neckline, simple, traditional, but in color, we're gonna go all in. So I'm super excited to show you guys this project. If you haven't seen it already, I did a mock-up of this pattern in my last video, and I made this DIRNDL out of this beautiful red wool that I had left over from this project of my coat that I did last year. And it turned out beautifully. I am super excited to do this kind of monochrome one color look this year, basically. That is the mock-up. I am ready to start my actual piece, which, you know, is gonna be purple if you haven't, gotten the memo. And I have this beautiful velvet, purple velvet, that I'm gonna do the bodice out of. I have this poplin fabric for the lining. It's also in the purple kind of color scheme. I'm just gonna show you from the top down. So this is the color combo for my bodice. And then I already made the crochet for my blouse that I'm gonna do at some point. So that is the crocheted piece that I have. It's already pressed and nice and neat. I'm gonna drape a blouse out of this. I am shooting tomorrow, so I don't know if I'm gonna be able to finish the blouse by tomorrow. I doubt it. So you're gonna see the dress with another blouse underneath, but my final look is going to be with this pattern, with this as my blouse. I already have a 3x4 of this for the back. So I actually also have another one, so I only need 3 squares to replicate this 16 square piece. I crocheted a lot during my vacation, which was very nice and satisfying. So that's that. You're going to see that in some video, maybe in a reel, I'm not sure, but you're gonna see it at some point. So I already prepped my back piece right here. You can not see it because the iron is in front of it, so let me just put that down for you. So that is what it looks like. I prepped one side already with the side back piece, and then I did this beautiful winter landscape embroidery that I just used from mysewnat.com, and I just put it right here in the center back in an almost matching color so that you still kind of can see it, but it's not too much in your face. So that's that. And then I also used this kind of piping knee. It's actually bias binding that I just put in between the seams for my piping in the back for my princess seams. So that is the plan. Enough talking, enough rambling. We're gonna start with this project now. I prepped all of my pattern pieces according to the interfacing guide that you can find in my sewing description. There's going to be a picture. So I put the interfacing tape and the interfacing generally on all the spots necessary. I added seam allowance according to my seam allowance suggestions that you can nowadays also find on my pattern pieces right here, with the only difference that I didn't add only 1 centimeter but 2 centimeters here at the waist. So maybe I'll update that in my small little diagram right here as well. That is just for me to have a little bit more room when actually pleating the skirt, because we're going to do a pleated skirt for this dress, not a gathered skirt, which I'm super excited about. And I just found it was a teeny tiny bit easier to work with if you have 2 centimeter seam allowance in the waist. Apart from that, 1 centimeter everywhere, 1.5 at the side seams. That's all. Same thing for my lining. So we're ready to put everything together. I already started with the side back piece because I wanted to try out the piping right here, and I'm going to show you how I did that. So usually piping has something on the inside, like some sort of yarn, cord, whatever. I have an example right here. So usually I would use something like that to put in between the seams, obviously in a matching color and not in this bright green. This could also be very beautiful with a green bodice with this emerald green piping in between, but whatever. I don't have a purple one, so I am not going to make a piping myself, but I'm just going to use bias binding. I have this purple bias binding right here that I used, and I'm essentially just going to iron this open and then fold it in half so that I have more than 1 centimeter, just a teeny tiny bit more. I think it's like 1.2 centimeters or something like that width that I have then, so that once I actually put it on my piece, I have this teeny tiny bit of piping of, you know, bias binding peeking out, and I can sew that onto my pieces and it looks like that. So that's what I'm gonna do really quickly. So I'm just gonna take my bias binding and iron it open. I have this seam right here, which I actually don't really want to use. I'm gonna cut this off. Maybe I can use that for a shorter section. Yeah, as you can see, it doesn't really want to iron. So that's as good as it gets. Let's take the back piece right here. And I'm not gonna put the side back on yet. I wanna actually fix the piping onto my seam right here. And I don't wanna give the piping more room here at the curve because we're gonna iron it towards the shorter side. So if you put too much in, it's just gonna bulge up. So you don't wanna do that. And sew it on at 1 centimeter. And with the piping now in place, I made sure to be as even as I can. I'm gonna put right sides together, and I actually want to sew from the side where you can see the stitches. So obviously you want to put it together, match up all of the notches, and then I'm just gonna sew right on top of my previous stitching line. That way I'm gonna ensure that I'm not gonna take away any, you know, space of the piping or whatnot. I'm just gonna sew right over top of the piping seam. Let's do that. Okay, that is what it looks like. And now you want to iron. So I'm going to start from this side here. With a velvet, you need to be kind of careful with ironing because the velvet obviously has a direction, and the velvet kind of tends to, you know, iron as well, obviously. There is some velvet things that you can buy to help with ironing. I don't have any of these, so I can't tell you what is good and what not out there. But for ironing, I definitely want to cut towards the stitching line on either side. I had to cut towards the stitching line of one side already because you just wouldn't be able to actually sew the pieces together. So you want to make sure to do that. And now I need to be very careful, and I'm gonna steam as well. And then you want to let it cool down in the shape that you're aiming for. So in my case, it's round like that here at the princess seam. That looks good to me. And then let's just iron the rest open as well. And I think I'm going to add a teeny tiny top stitch right on top the piping, just next to it, to just hold it in place with a matching color, obviously, so that you don't necessarily see it, but the piping always stays in the same direction. I've decided to add a decorative stitch down the center of my back from the end of the embroidery. I'll be back in a sec. And that is what it looks like. So I also added it up here. I think it's really, really cute. I don't know if you can see it too much on camera, but it's there. And I think it looks really cute. By the way, I am always, when I'm doing any decorative stitches on my puff, always putting down a tearaway backing paper. I like to do tearaway because you can simply tear it away and there is almost no residue. Puff also has some coming out of their own, so I'm looking forward to testing those. Let's continue with the front piece. So that's the back, it's completely done now. We're gonna continue with the front piece before we actually line everything, because I have a new method of lining or putting the whole thing together that I want to show you. So let's do the front. So the front consists of 4 pieces. We have the side piece right here, also with more seam allowance here. Then we have this piece right here, the front and the bust insert. This is how they go together. I like to add the bust insert to the front piece first because it is a fairly straight line, and this one here is more curved because that's where you need the room. So I tend to fix this onto the front piece first before I do the middle front piece. But what I'm actually going to start with today is also the princess seam in the front here as well. And I have this piece right here that had this merging of two different strips, so I cut it off, but I think I can utilize that for this seam. So I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm going to iron this in half and then put it onto my center front piece. And with that done, I am just going to show you what I did with the seam allowance. So I'm going to leave the bias binding intact and just cut towards the stitching line in my fashion fabric piece right here so that I can basically straighten it out like that. So now I can put this piece right sides on here. I'm just gonna start, matching up the seam, the stitching line, and then I want to match up the notch right here and the last one down here. And I'm gonna sew again from the side where you can see the stitching all the way down and put both pieces together with the piping in between. Let's again iron the seam allowance open and from the side carefully, and I want the piping face towards the side seam. Like that. I'm going to add the top stitches here, and then the piping is done also for the front piece. Let's put the center front and the bust insert together. So you want to match up the straighter of the two sides of the bust insert with the front piece. You're going to pin the stitching line up here together, and then you're going to find a notch that you want to match up. And down here, for me, it's the easiest to mark my stitching line with a water-soluble pen or anything that you have, tailor's chalk, something like that. So I'm gonna measure my seam allowance towards the piece to get the crisscross point right here. So I know that is my stitching point at that corner. And then I'm gonna repeat the same for my front piece. I now know these 2 points have to match up. So I'm gonna use a pin. I like to use another pin, go at an angle, and then that's fixed in place. And now I'm gonna sew from this point down to the crisscross here. And that is what it looks like. So now I wanna cut towards that point, like so, and iron this seam open just up until here. And now up here you have a bunch of fabric that just lays over top of each other, and which is also unnecessary. So I don't want to do that, but I can cut off all of that because I still have this piece of seam allowance that I can also cut a teeny tiny bit smaller left over. And once I put my other front piece on, you're gonna find another notch down here that marks exactly that point. So you can go in and mark the crisscross here again. You don't necessarily have to, but it's right there. And for us here, it needs to match up with that intersection that we just put in. So now, once I put right sides together and use a pin to match this up, it should match up with the seam right here. And I'm gonna sew from the side so that I know exactly that I am catching that crisscross. And then up here, you're gonna find another notch right here that also marks the stitching line. So we have seam allowance for the neckline up here as well. Therefore, the stitching line is 1 centimeter lower and 1 centimeter in from the bust insert. So this notch right here, which marks the stitching line at that point, needs to match up with the stitching line right here. Measured 1 centimeter in from both sides, like this. I'm gonna sew from that notch all the way down to the waistline. And once we flip this around, the intersection looks super clean, very nice. Everything is where it's supposed to be, so we can go ahead and also iron this. I am trying to cut away this triangle right here. Maybe I can kind of pull it out of my seam if I cut it close enough, just to free it a teeny tiny bit. That should be enough. And now it's very easy for me to open the seam up and press that. So for that, since it is the bust area, I'm going to use a round tailor's ham. And up here where there is that notch, I'm also going to cut towards the stitching line here to be able to iron this open without any seam allowances folding in any weird ways. And that's what it looks like pressed from the outside, and the rest I can do on a flat surface like that. Now that is perfectly crisp, very nice result. And now the front piece is also done. So let's rinse and repeat and do exactly the same for the other side of the front, obviously, and then for the lining. So all of my pieces are now together, so we can put lining and shell together. I already prepared the other side because I had to check if what I was thinking could work out actually works out. Very excited to show you this version of the dirndl. I guess that is the prettiest and easiest version for putting dirndl patterns together that don't have, you know, other decorative details like the one with the heart cutout. There is obviously a specific method to do that, but for any other normal bodice, you should be able to do it that way. So I have my front piece and my lining here now, so I can put right sides together, and I want to close the neckline and the arm's eye. So I'll make sure to match up the corner here. So here is my stitching line in my shell, and I want to match that up with the stitching line in my lining, like so. And the rest I'll do under the sewing machine. But basically you put this together and then understitch the neckline. And once you've done the understitching, you can go ahead and close the arm's eye. You don't need to understitch there. You're probably not going to be able to reach anyways. So let's quickly do that. And before we turn anything around, you want to make sure to clip into the seam allowance at the round area so that you're able to actually iron everything nicely. This overlap here with my lining, you don't have to do that, because obviously I'm gonna have a lining pattern specifically. I don't have that for my piece right now because I didn't do my pattern yet completely. Obviously, you're gonna have a dedicated lining pattern, so just be aware of that and match up your pieces together perfectly, and not like this. With that now done, we can go ahead and turn this right sides out. What I found works best is some sort of long metal piece with a hook at the end. This is a piece I use frequently to turn around some small spaghetti straps or something like that. I'm not sure what this tool is called, but basically I just hook it here and then I can kind of pull it through. Just be careful. But once you have this, you can unhook it and just pull it through. So let's get to ironing. We want to iron the ditch of the seam towards the lining so that none of that is visible on the right side. I cut away the seam allowance at the corner point. You have to cut towards your stitching line, otherwise this will not turn around. So if you don't cut towards your stitching line here, this will just, not look great. It's gonna tear and pull and it's not gonna be fine. And then here, I'm just gonna iron the ditch of the seam towards the lining as usual. And the same for the arm's eye. And that is what the front is gonna end up looking like. So now we're gonna repeat the same for the back piece, just the arm's eyes on both sides, and then the V-neck on the back. Obviously for the V, you also have to cut towards the center back stitching line to create some space once you flip everything right sides out so that the seam allowance can open up. Otherwise it's also gonna tear and tuck and not look great. So you just wanna be careful about that. But that's simple enough, and then you're gonna end up with something that looks like this. That is my back piece. And here's the front piece that I just created. So obviously you want to put right sides together. Now we already turned both pieces right sides out in order to be able to iron nicely. So the easiest piece to turn back over is obviously the back, because you have way more space in here. So what I like to do is actually match up my shell like this. And then I go in between here and kind of grab the shell from here and take it out as much as needed, basically. And then I can go ahead and match up specifically the seam where I put the lining on. And I like it best to flip the seam allowance towards the lining. Essentially, it doesn't matter because everything will lay towards one side anyway, so it doesn't matter. But since the shell usually is thicker than the lining, it's just easier to flip it towards the lining. And it kind of gets the same thickness right here. Now for this part, it's a tiny bit more difficult because we have this edge. So what I like to do is to just cut towards the stitching line next to my actual seam and then also here, so that I am actually able to sew this together. And then this can open up as it needs to, and we can match up the stitching line here. And now I'm going to do the shell first. I'm going to go from this seam to this seam, back tag on either end, and then I'm going to repeat the same for the lining. Okay, I just like to cut away these bigger junctions right here, and I guess this can stay. So let's turn this back around. You just need to pull on the front piece. I like to kind of feel so that everything lays towards the back, and that's now together. So let's go ahead and iron over top of that seam so that everything looks neat. And that is what it looks like from the right side. I think it looks really, really nice. The next thing is to close the side seams. I have 1.5 centimeters seam allowance on my side seams right here. So I am firstly going to baste the two layers together, and then I'm just going to use my bias binding that I already used for the piping right here and finish the edges of every side seam right here before putting right sides together and closing the side seams. And once done with that, I'm going to press my side seam open. I also added a small bar tag at the top right here. It's not really visible. You don't have to do that. You can also just iron and, you know, call it a day like that. That's that. And that is the bodice for now done. So to create the skirt, you first of all want to add all of your 3 panels. 3 as in 2 selvage to selvage, and 1 you're going to cut in half to create the center front seam. So you're going to end up with 3 panels, the 2 smaller ones being the front pieces. So you want to put these together by just putting right sides together. I have my big back panel right here with my selvage edge, which I'm going to use as, you know, already finished edge. And then I have my 2 front pieces, so the smaller ones, and I'm just going to match those up and simply sew along the selvage. Going to repeat that for the other side here of my back as well, and put the other front piece on. And then I'm going to end up with a very long panel, about 3 meters wide, which we're going to end up pleating to the size of our bodice. I'm going to iron the selvage seam allowance towards one side. Because we're going to pleat it, it's going to lay towards one side or the other. And once we're done with that, we're going to add the pockets to the front. You could have also done that before you made a huge panel, which probably would have been a bit easier, but I forgot. So probably in my sewing instructions, I'm going to tell you to do the pockets first. So what I like to do is to third the front panel right here. So I'm just going to measure 25 centimeters towards the front, the center front from my side seam. And then from there on, I'm going to draw a perpendicular line to the waistline. I have the 2 centimeter seam allowance, and then I want to have a little bit of distance from that waist seam. So let's do 3 centimeters, and then I'll have 15 centimeters pocket opening. And then up here, I'm just gonna put a strip of interfacing on top. So obviously you're gonna mirror everything to the other side as well. I have my 2 pocket pieces here, and I'm gonna cut towards the 15 centimeter mark, and I'm gonna leave it at that. Now I'm gonna take my pockets and I'm gonna put right sides together. I have 1 centimeter seam allowance attached down here. So I'm gonna start pinning a centimeter higher right where I stopped cutting. So the first pin goes in exactly at the notch right here, and then it should reach just towards the upper notch right here. So now I want to sew from 1 millimeter seam allowance all the way up to 5 millimeter seam allowance. And I'm going to repeat the same for the other side. Okay, and that is what it looks like. So now I want to iron the pockets towards the inside. One side is going to face towards the front, but we're going to sort that out in just a second. So let's just iron this crisp and neat. Right here is my side seam and right here is my center front. So I'm going to have my pocket right here lay flat, and then on top of that my pocket is gonna face towards the front, and I'm just gonna put them right on top of each other. All of that will be hidden inside a pleat, so this down here really doesn't matter. I'm just gonna do this and kind of iron it like that. And once you peel it open, this lays perfectly on top of each other, so we can put that together. And down here, there's also this sort of, kind of fold that I created. So in one go, I can go from up here all the way around the pocket up until here. I'm gonna go towards the inside, probably about like 3 millimeters, and then pivot and just go down like I would with a dart. And then obviously you wanna go around with your overlock machine so that nothing frays like that. So let's go around the pocket and then repeat the same for the other side. Okay, and that is what my finished pocket looks like from the wrong side, and that is from the right side. So as you can see, there it is. It neatly tucks away and hides away in between, all of these stripes. And then obviously once we actually make pleats, this is gonna hide inside a pleat. So you're never gonna see any of that, which is really handy. But for now, I just ironed it like this. So I'm going to pleat my skirt now. And what I like to do is to put my bodice down. You can also just measure your bodice, but I like to have it visually in front of me because I like to use specific points as pleating points basically. So I want to have pleats at specific points like the side seam or the dividing seams either in front or back, and I'm using my ironing surface, so a bunch of felt essentially, to pin my bodice in place and therefore also then pinning my pleats in place. So I have my center back in both skirt and bodice pinned down, and I'm going to start with the right side. So I want to have a box pleat right here in the center back, and there is not really specifically math behind that. I tend to just eyeball it. So I just like to pleat, iron, pin, and continue. Essentially, that's all I'm gonna do. I know that I have to pleat a bunch because I have 2 large panels of skirt, so I have 3 meters to condense to, 65 centimeters. So there's a lot of pleats that I need to do, so I can do very deep pleats. And obviously you have some points that you need to match up. For example, the side seam, obviously it needs to match up with the side seam, so you can see how much room I have in order to match up the side seam like that. And I'm not gonna match up the side seam like this because I want my seam of the side seam in the skirt on the inside of a pleat. So what that means is, since I am pleating towards the center back, I'm gonna have that lay like so, somewhere towards the front, and then have a pleat that meets the side seam like that. And then I'll repeat that for the left side. I'm gonna try to mirror the pleats of this side, but I'm probably not gonna be able to, you know, copy it exactly, which I'm not aiming towards. It is a striped fabric. It's gonna be so much to look at anyways, like I don't care if it is perfectly mirrored. Obviously you could if you wanted to, but I'm not gonna bother, so let's go. So now with all of the pleats in place, I'm going to flip down my bodice, and I made sure to, you know, pin my pleats in place like this. So I'm gonna put right sides together, match up the center back with the box pleat. I wanna be super careful to exactly sew the pleats of the box pleat right up next to each other. And then also match up all of my pleats with their respective spots. And remember, you have a little bit more seam allowance at the waistline. So I want to sew at 2 centimeters. Okay, I feel like that's it. And now I'm gonna sew with my pleats facing towards me so that I can, you know, adjust anything if I need to. Especially here, you can see that the pleats kind of slipped down. So I'll do that under the sewing machine, and I'm gonna sew the waistline at 2 centimeters. Just check whether everything looks fine, neat and tidy. So technically I'm good to overlock. So let's just fix that and then overlock along the waistline. And that is what it looks like now. As you can see, I did not overlock, but I added bias binding. Does the same thing. I feel like this is just a teeny tiny bit neater. It looks very, very nice. And I went ahead and ironed everything into the skirt because you don't want to have any bulge, you know, at your waist area. So I have something that I need to tell you. Up here in my center front, I actually undid my stitches up until 4 centimeters further towards the inside, and then restitched my skirt onto the shell only because I have 2 centimeter seam allowance everywhere, so also on my lining. And once I add the zipper, you need to be able to tuck away the lining somehow and then fix it in place by hand. And then this is just dangling there because I don't know yet how I am going to fix that in place yet. So we can always cut it off, but not put it back on if it's cut off once. So I also went ahead and overlocked the center front seam. As you can see here, just went down the whole center front. Okay, zipper time. So I have my center front right here, and the first thing that I'm gonna do is iron the 2 centimeter seam allowance of my center front towards the inside for my shell and then also for my lining. So I wanna flip this around like that as well, and then fold it down, and you can just eye it, you know, press it down like so, and have your center front prepped that way. So this is what it looks like from the right side then. Very clean, very nice. And now we're just gonna pop that back out because we're gonna add our zipper to the seam allowance. So I have my purple zipper right here with a cute little, you know, ball detail for the zipper sledge. Not sure what you call it in English. We would call it that in German if you translate it literally. And I want to go ahead and start pinning my teeth right next to that fold line. So I'm just going to use some vertical pins so that I can, you know, fold this and show you what I mean by that. So if you fold this, the teeth are hidden by the fold line. You might want to go a teeny tiny bit in further if you feel like it's not going to be enough, because there will be some tension towards the sides. And essentially what it's doing is unveiling the zipper teeth. So you want to give the teeth a teeny tiny bit more veil, I guess, a bit more coverage. And then down here, you don't need all of this, like probably up until here is fine, like go, I don't know, 20 centimeters down. And also put the zipper in just behind the fold line. I like to, first of all, sew somewhere on the zipper band. I just want to base it in place. And then I'm going to use the narrow one and, you know, very closely to the teeth, put the zipper in. And once we fold everything, we can then make it look very nice on the inside. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, and once you flip that towards the inside all the way around, you can kind of tuck away that upper portion towards the inside as well. And once everything is folded down, you can see that it's just gonna hide everything very nicely, and you're gonna have a very cute and nice inside and outside. So that is the perfect way to finish your dirndl on the inside with a zipper. Now for this, you probably just want to clip into the seam allowance somewhere here. In fact, I'm going to do that as well, like so that you can take out all of these like fabrics that you don't necessarily want. And once you maneuver the lining in place, let's give it another iron so that you have the exact placement that you want. I am tucking it under a teeny tiny bit more so that I have enough room for the zipper to glide up and down. You want to then shorten this, and then you can flip this under as well, like so that you have a nice finish. And you can also machine stitch that in place. Now to mirror the placement, I prepped my other side the same way, and I now want to go ahead and mark exactly where my waist seam is and also where my fold line is, which is right here. Probably it's best to have it on the other side as well, because that is where I am working. I'm gonna unzip and essentially just place this exactly the same way as I placed the other side, and then just hope that it matches up. Okay, once everything is done and prepped, you should end up with something like that. I'm gonna go ahead later on and top stitch everything in place, which you should do too. Otherwise, this is not gonna have enough strength, and the teeth of the zipper will show once there is some tension on the skirt. But everything else matches up very, very nicely. I'm super pleased with that. So the one thing left is to close the remaining center front at 2 centimeters up until that point that we sewed. Then we're gonna iron this open, and then finally we can hem the skirt. So let's do that. So let's iron the seam open here, like so. And with that done, we can add the top stitches to the center front. I'm gonna go 1 centimeter next to my zipper, like next to the fold line here. Let's just undo the zipper, and I'm gonna top stitch at 1 centimeter, and hopefully I'm gonna catch the lining as well. If not, I have to hand sew it in place here, but that's fine too. So I'm gonna go around here until I reach this point. So I'm gonna go over top the seam here and back up again. That's why I also did the needles like I did. And that's it for today's video. I am super, super happy with the outcome of this dirndl, and I totally love it. I can't wait to actually wear it. I'm gonna make an apron for this dirndl specifically out of a silk. I have these 4 different options right here, so I'm not sure which one I'm gonna pick, but I think all of them would work very, very well with the dirndl. So I'm gonna see what I pick and if I do multiple or just one or whatever. So the apron pattern is the one from 2 years ago. I made some tweaks so I can use this clasp. So that's something I might want to look into for a new pattern as well that might come in the future. So look out for that by hitting the subscribe button below, and also ring the bell so you'll not miss that video, just in case you haven't already. I am actually open for 1 or 2 commissions for this pattern, like a physical dirndl, if you like the style, the colors or whatever, but you don't want to make it yourself, which I can totally understand because it is physically challenging and it's not the easiest thing to make. So if you want me to make you your dirndl, you can actually check out the link, the commission link, in the description down below. I am available for 1 or 2, depending on, you know, how many there are of you guys that want me to make something for you. In this color variation, I think I have, for the bodice, I can make 1 more bodice, and for the skirt, I can make plenty. So I'm gonna have the option for you guys to pick this color variation, or we can, you know, talk about a color variation that you like with fabrics that I already have. So if that is something that you're interested in, check out the commission link in the description down below. Also, loads of other links down there as well, which you should definitely check out. For example, my social channels. I make short format content between all of my YouTube videos. I upload on Instagram, YouTube Shorts, and Pinterest. So pick any of these 3 or all of them if you want to support me that way. The most direct way is to support me over on my Etsy shop, where you can find this pattern, of course, as per usual. So check that out if you're interested, and if you haven't purchased it already. I have 2 other patterns, dirndl patterns from last year and the year before, that are also really, really pretty, and I made plenty of them already personally and also on my channel. So if you're interested in that, also check out the links. A special thank you to my channel members. You can get exclusive benefits through the link in the description down below. So thank you so much for watching, and I'm gonna see you next Sunday. Bye guys!